But today, I want to talk about another cross-border comparison, perhaps the starkest we've seen in the modern world, and that was between totalitarian communism and the Western values that we all hold dear. Nowhere in the long 40-year battle of the Cold War did we see that more sharply drawn than in Berlin, which from 1961 to 1989, 28 years, was divided as a city by the wall that you're all familiar with. And we all know of the human tragedies that created. We also know of the contrast. If you visited East Berlin, you saw buildings still pockmarked with damage from the war. And if you visited West Berlin, albeit it was subsidized in part by the West German government, it was a thriving island of freedom and democracy. For me, this became very, very personal, and not only in the lessons between communism and freedom, but also the lessons that we all too complacent Americans sometimes refuse to heed. In 1984, the Orwell year, I visited Berlin, and as part of a delegation, by the way, our guide, who was from the U.S. mission in Clé-Alais, turned out 7 years later he was arrested as a KGB agent. So much for my abilities as an investigative journalist. I saw him 3 or 4 times. I wondered why he was always so curious and kept trying to get me to drink more. You can look up the story, I'll tell you later. Stefan Laufer was his name. We took a tour of East Berlin, saw everything we wanted to see, came back, and the next day I went with one of my colleagues who worked for the U.S. Embassy. We went over to the Museum of German History in East Berlin. And I could hold a conversation in German, but certainly was not fluent. He was completely fluent, so we were walking through the museum, I think somewhere between somewhere about the time we learned that television was invented by an East German, I think was where we had this encounter. You learn things in this museum you never learned anywhere else. And we were stopped by 4 school children, 4 schoolgirls, about 14 or 15 years of age. And they stopped us, and they wanted to know what time it was, which was curious because A, they had watches, and B, we didn't look anything special. And we quickly discovered that they were from the outskirts of East Germany. They had never been to their capital. This was their first trip there. And we were the first Westerners they'd ever met. They were from the backwaters. And we asked them, how did you know we were from the West? And they said, very simply, we looked at your shoes. And they weren't made of plastic. That's how we knew you were from the West. So we chatted with them for a little bit, back and forth, and then their teacher came. Those of you who saw the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest will remember Nurse Ratched. That was the teacher. Those of you who do not know One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, remember Elvira Gulch, the character in The Wizard of Oz in the black and white part? That was that teacher. She said, it is time to go. Well, it wasn't time to go, they said. They had an hour more in the museum. No, it was time to go. We were clearly a subversive influence on them. So they left. And we went on through our little tour of the city, and we went to Centrum Warenhaus, which was then the major department store of East Berlin. If you want to know what it was like, I can tell you very simply. Kmart with no inventory. Simple. We were walking through Centrum Warenhaus, trying desperately to spend the money that we'd been forced to exchange at the border. It was hard. And then we ran into the 4 school girls again. It turned out their teacher did have a weakness. It was shopping, and she had some right as a party member to shop in the inner shops where you could actually get real goods. So she had let them go for the day. So we knew their capital city better than they did, so we offered to take them on a tour of East Berlin, and we did for the whole day. And I bought them ice cream, and I showed them my passport, and they showed us their Ausweise, their identity papers. And we had nice long chats, and we were probably with them from 10:30 in the morning till 6:30 at night. And then, obviously, it was towards the end of the day, and they had to go back to their hostel. And we started walking back to the Friedrichstrasse station where you could cross over the wall. And they had never seen the wall. You could spend much of your life in East Berlin and never see the wall if you didn't want to. But they instinctively knew it was coming. So they were walking more and more slowly as we approached the wall, even though we hadn't seen it yet. And finally, as we turned the corner and we actually saw it ahead of us, 300 or 400 yards away, they all stopped and said, we're told this is the zone where they start asking questions. Why are you so close to the wall? So maybe we shouldn't go any further. Maybe we just should say goodbye to you here. And I said to them, well, I was almost speechless because my heart almost broke. Here I was. I had very little money. I was in my 20s. But I could go anywhere in the world with a plane ticket and $500 from that street corner. Almost anywhere in the world. They couldn't go another 250 yards before their world ended. So just to keep the conversation going, I asked them at some point, what do you want to be when you grow up? Here in the German Democratic Republic, East Germany. And one said a nurse, and one said a teacher, and one said a beautician. But the oldest and wisest was named Monika, and she had dark, soulful eyes. And she looked up at me, I'll never forget this, she shook her head and said, it doesn't really make any difference what we become. No matter what we become here in this country, they will always treat us as children. And that really was a gut-wrenching revelation. Because in the latter stages of communism, there weren't that many knocks in the dead of night. There weren't that many political prisoners taken away to a gulag. There was intimidation, there was denial of privileges, people forced to do menial work. There were many, many indignities, but sheer totalitarian murder, brutality, purges, not so much. But everyone was infantilized to some extent. They couldn't be trusted to do anything except exactly what the government told them to do, what they'd been assigned to do. And I had to agree with her, even though I didn't want to admit it to her publicly. So I sort of gulped. We exchanged addresses. I sent them some postcards from California, and we parted. And over the next 5 years, I sent postcards every once in a while to her. She responded. And then 1989 came. And I believe it was in July when Solidarity won the elections in Poland, and building up to August when the Austrians and the Hungarians met, and Otto von Habsburg's pan-European picnic at the border, and the barbed wire came down and people started streaming over the border. Culminating in November with the sudden, and it was a complete accident, it was a bureaucrat misreading his paper in front of him at a press conference, complete accident, the Berlin Wall opened. And I was there watching on television as this stream of people from east to west flowed through. And I asked myself, I wonder if Monika is one of them. She'd been denied a place at the university because she had politically incorrect family members. So she'd been denied a place at Humboldt University, but I knew she was living in Berlin at the time. And I wondered, is she there? Well, the next morning, it turns out, capitalists as they are, AT&T, the phone company, that still was the way you made phone calls back then, they had looked at all these people coming over and said, well, of course they're seeking freedom, but they'll want to make phone calls someday. So they set up these portable kiosks with phones all over West Berlin near the wall as these people came through, and they had an offer. You could make a free call anywhere in the world from that little kiosk. Anywhere in the world, just to show how it worked, just to show what it's like not to have a waiting list that's 3 years long to get a phone. And they had early cell phones on display. You know, the bricks? They had the bricks there. So Monika had come over the wall that night and the next morning, and she saw this kiosk, and she decided to call me. So she called me at home, woke me up early, and I will never forget, I picked up the phone, and she said, "John, this is Monica. I'm over the wall." Well, I was over the moon for her. That was great. So we had this conversation, and I don't remember all of it, but I do remember this, how it ended. I reminded her of the conversation we'd had on the street corner 5 years earlier in East Berlin when she was 14 years old. And I reminded her of that phone conversation, and I asked her, "Well, do you think they will still treat you as children?" And she, being very quick-witted, said, "John, I think my entire country has graduated from kindergarten through high school in one night." Well, the rest of the story, in terms of Europe, is very brief. She got back into Humboldt University. She eventually became a veterinarian. Is doing very well. But there's a coda to the story which involves the U.S., involves us. 5 years later, I guess it was 1994, she and her fiancé were coming to California for a visit. I happened to be there visiting my family at the same time near here in San Francisco. I went to a very good public high school, as public high schools go. And every 4 years or so, I go back to my public high school and I give a talk or some kind of thing, mostly for an advanced placement class. And every 4 years, I flinch, I grimace a little because I can see the discipline a little bit less vigorous, the dress and manner of the students a little bit less professional. I'm not just an old fuddy-duddy. I mean, I can see the standards not quite what they were. So I was a little hesitant because her request was, "Can I come speak to an American high school class about the changes?" By then, the two countries were reunited in one. And I hesitated, but finally I made arrangements with a teacher I knew, and we went in, and I introduced her, and she spoke. And maybe it was a bad class, or maybe it was a bad day, but it was not good. Kids were chewing gum, they were inattentive, a couple were talking in the back. It wasn't good. Finally, the time for questions came. First question: why in the world would some jerks build a wall down the middle of a city? Doesn't that stop traffic? No understanding or idea of what was going on over there at the time. And she, struggled through it, trying to explain it in even simpler terms than she had in her original talk. And at the end, class files out, and I have to say, I was a little ashamed, embarrassed even, as an American. So as we walked out, I turned to her and I said, "Monica, I'm sure it was a bad class, a bad day. I'm sure that, the next time if you come, we can find..." And she stopped, waved her hand like this. And she looked at me, and those same dark, soulful eyes were looking back at me, and she said, "John, I just want to tell you something. We had our challenges, and we still do. But these children, some of them, even though they grew up free, no matter what they do now, given what they're learning here or not learning here, many of them will continue to act as children the rest of their life." And I think that's one of the Berlin Walls that faces us. This is the theme of the conference. I believe that there is a conscious effort by some people, some special interests, some groups, to want to infantilize children, to want to make sure that they don't engage in critical thinking. They don't ask questions. They don't look at the world around them and say, "Why not?" They accept what they're given. I don't say that's all of them, but I think that there's actively a group of people who want people to sit down and shut up. And that's part of our challenge in our public education system today. That's why we have this battle over school choice. I'll be making some remarks about that tomorrow. We have Berlin Walls that are solid. You still can't cross the Chinese border. You still can't cross many borders. Venezuela is constantly trying to prevent people from leaving the country. Argentina doesn't want anyone to take dollars or any assets out of the country. There are all kinds of physical barriers remaining in countries around the world. But there are also psychological barriers. We increasingly are being set upon by people who, even if they can't win over this generation or the previous generation before that, they can infantilize the coming generation. They can make sure that they don't ask the questions. There's no historical context anymore. And I'll close with this. Everyone should remember that the last speech Ronald Reagan made as president was called a farewell address. Go back and watch it. It's on YouTube, or read it. What was his message in that farewell address? He said, "I have enormous optimism and confidence in this country, but I will raise one major concern. We are not teaching our children our history, our birthright. We're not teaching them about the Constitution. We're not teaching them why we had a revolution. We're not teaching them about the true meaning of freedom. We're replacing it with almost everything else, recycling, multiculturalism, fine things in some respect, but the dessert, not the meat and potatoes in most cases." And he warned us about forgetting our history. He said, if we forget our history, he reminded us, freedom is always one generation away from being forgotten. If we do not transmit the values and the traditions and the importance of freedom to the next generation, there's nothing in our bloodstream that will convey it. There's nothing that we can inherit. There's nothing we can will to someone to believe in freedom. We have to teach it to them. So the sad part is our institutions which used to convey those values have failed us in many respects, although not all. I think there's a bit of a comeback. And certainly the growing school choice movement, many of those people are conveying it. But here's where it comes in. And this is whether it's in the US or overseas, or the connection between the US and our fellow human beings around the world. It's groups like Atlas, the Atlas Network, that have to do this kind of teaching, that have to convey these values. It's a shame, but frankly, we're doing very well. I meet more and more young people. They may not have gotten it in civics. Civics is abolished now, I think, in high schools. But they're picking it up elsewhere. They're picking it up from groups like FEE, the Foundation for Economic Education. They're picking it up from magazines like Reason. They're picking it up from Students for Liberty. They're picking it up from a whole range of groups, and they're picking it up from the Atlas Network. And I believe this is a wonderful, wonderful time, given the internet and the ability that we have to tell stories cheaply. The price of digital videos to tell stories is falling. The ability to publish cheaply and get books into the people's hands of people is better and more easily done than ever. This is a golden opportunity for us to communicate our values to the world. We just have to have the understanding of how great the need is, and frankly, if we don't do it, it won't be done by the institutions we used to depend upon to do it. It's up to us, and if we do it, there's no limit to what we can accomplish. Thank you.